Well, welcome everyone. It's good to have you here for the 10th annual Theology for Teachers workshop. I want to extend a special welcome to everybody in the room and everybody on the Zoom. It's good to have you with us as well. My name is Ed Hannenberg, and I am the Breen Chair in Catholic Theology here at John Carroll University, and I am just delighted. It has been my privilege over these past 10 years to organize this event, which I see as an opportunity for continuing education, for resource sharing, but also as an opportunity to remind ourselves of why we do what we do, to recommit ourselves to our teaching vocation, and to re-energize ourselves for the year ahead. So this year we have 83 teachers registered for in-person from 20 different schools. Got another 70 or so online coming to us from 18 states and the District of Columbia, ranging, we've got them from all the way from Tacoma, Washington to Pensacola, Florida. So welcome, it's good to have you with us. We've got 6 teachers from St. Pius X in Houston, Texas. So it's really a delight to see so many folks coming together, so many folks who care about what they do and make the time to be here to do it even better. The 10-year anniversary gave me an opportunity to sort of look back on these past years, and you know how much I like stats. So over the past 10 years, I have collected 1,140 individual registration fees. So over 1,000 individual registration fees. Now, since so many of you are repeat offenders, that works out to 583 teachers having participated either in person or online from 189 different Catholic high schools. So this has really been wonderful. And I also couldn't help notice folks who have never missed a theology for teachers. So if we could just recognize, and I hope I don't miss anybody or misinform anybody. Now there was one year, namely 2020, when we were all online. So this includes folks who've been here every year and who registered for that online session. We've got Allison Barbrick from St. Joseph's Academy. Is she here? If she's not, we will kind of take back. Okay, she's here. Ah, there she is. Great. John Barrett from St. Ed's. Kristen Busa from St. Joe's Academy. Cheryl Byrne from Walsh Jesuit. Adam Green, St. Ignatius. Drew Marquardt from Walsh Jesuit. And Chris Merriman from St. Ed's. So if there are others who are convinced that they haven't missed the session, come up to me afterwards and I'll add you to the list. It's good for us to be together. We always begin with a prayer. God knows we need it. God knows our world needs it. So let's take a moment. You know, the Society of Jesus has called Jesuit institutions like John Carroll to prioritize 4 apostolic preferences, one of which is to accompany young people towards a hope-filled future. I don't know about you, I find the accompanying easy. It's the hope that's the hard part these days. And so I found myself in recent months returning to and rereading Walter Brueggemann's The Prophetic Imagination. Those of you who know the book, in describing Moses as a prophet, Brueggemann contrasts him with the Pharaoh. And in doing so, he contrasts the prophet and the king, or what he calls the royal consciousness. Moses, with the help of God, could imagine a new future, an alternative to the present. Pharaoh believed there was nothing new, that everything was already given. No change was possible. The status quo is the eternal now. Forever is always the word of Pharaoh, says Brueggemann. Brueggemann writes, the prophet does not ask if the vision can be implemented, for questions of implementation are of no consequence until the vision can be imagined. Imagination must come before the implementation. Our culture is competent, Brueggemann continues, our culture is competent to implement almost anything and to imagine almost nothing. The same royal consciousness that makes it possible to implement anything and everything is the one that shrinks imagination, because imagination is a danger. Thus, every totalitarian regime is frightened of the artist. It is the vocation of the prophet to keep alive the ministry of imagination, to keep on conjuring and proposing futures alternative to the single one the king wants to urge as the only thinkable one. So hope is first and foremost an act of imagination, which is the theme of our opening plenary today. So my prayer this morning for us is short and simple. Let's recall that we are always already in the presence of God, and remind ourselves that we pray in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. A reading from the prophet Isaiah. God says, "See, I am doing something new. Now it springs forth. Do you not perceive it? In the desert I make a way, in the wasteland rivers." Good and gracious God, help us to perceive, allow us to see. Amen. We are delighted to welcome back home to Cleveland John Carroll alum Father Ryan Duns of the Society of Jesus. Father Duns is a Jesuit priest, teacher, and theologian who writes at the intersection of philosophy, systematic theology, and contemporary culture. He is the author of 2 books, Spiritual Exercises for a Secular Age and Theology of Horror, and is the co-author of the recently published Who Will You Become? An Ignatian Introduction to Catholic Theology. If you're able to make it to the end of the day after our second round of breakout sessions this morning, we'll regather back in this room, and I'll be giving out door prizes. And the chief door prize is an autographed copy of this wonderful book, Who Will You Become? An Ignatian Introduction to Catholic Theology. And if you're not the lucky one who wins that book, the bookstore has copies available for purchase all day today, and I'm sure Father Duns would be happy to sign one for you. Father Duns currently serves as Associate Professor and Chair of the Theology Department at Marquette University in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. In his remarks this morning, Father Duns invites us to imagine our classrooms as spaces not only for imparting information, but also for fostering transformation. His lecture is titled Missionaries of the Imagination. Please join me in welcoming Father Ryan Duns.
All right, so thank you everyone for coming. I do come from a land far away, North Olmsted. When I was a kid, I thought that the Valley View Bridge was the end of the known world. And it's still, even as I drove towards John Carroll this morning, a commute I made several times each week when I was in graduate studies back in the early 2000s, I was hit with many fond memories of coming back and forth and how special a place John Carroll was for me and continues to be. I have a master's degree from here, and then a number of my family members do as well. And it is a pleasure to be with you this morning. I was at a conference with Dr. Hannenberg earlier in September that was hosted at Marquette University. Thank you. And at that conference, it was the typical people reading their talks. And that can be very interesting and very illuminating, but on that day, I did not find it to be interesting or illuminating. And so I assured him that evening that I would do the exact opposite. It is a prepared talk, but it is not with lots of text, because I'd like it not to bore you. So what I would like you to do, since that you're partitioned at different tables, Would you please take a moment to introduce yourself to someone you haven't met? And just do this in 30 seconds. 1, 2, 3, all eyes on me. I taught kindergarten for 6 months once when I was a baby Jesuit. My wager is that you exchanged information about one another. What your name was, the school you teach at, and more than likely the courses that you are currently teaching, the class year that you are engaged in serving this semester. And that's typical. But apart from your name badges, could you remember the people right now that you were introduced to? Can you remember their names? And if you're like me, it's very difficult. You get a name, then you get a bunch of information about the person, but as you're receiving that information, the name itself drifts off. And so you're sort of sitting with people you know you should know, but it's too awkward to ask again. So I hear that this is a golf thing. I have Irish skin, so I do not golf, because that involves you being outside. So I'm an indoor Jesuit, kind of like a Siamese cat. What I would like you to do is this, just with one other person. I found this to be very helpful with my students this semester. I learned this from a podcast where all truth is now disseminated. So what I would like you to do is start to reintroduce yourself this way. Imagine a world where, so you're going to say to your partner, imagine a world where, and then I would like you to insert something that you are passionate about, something you are interested in. Like I might start, imagine a world where everyone played Irish music. And when they wanted to have a conversation, they would first sit down and start playing music with one another before they talked or argued. Could be something as simple as that. Well, not that that's particularly simple. Then you say, so imagine a world where something you're interested or passionate about, my name is, and I'm excited and passionate about whatever it is that then clarify what it is you're passionate about. So I'll give you 15 seconds to think about imagining a world. It's sort of like a theater trailer. Okay, now turn to one person, imagine a world, introduce yourself again, and what are you excited about? You take one turn each. Go. Okay. All right, here we go. There's no good way. I can't do that. I can't whistle. All right, here we go. We're moving on. Oh, you could. Imagine if we could get class participation like this every time you wanted to have a discussion. It would be great. Now, the reason I asked you to do this is because my sense of teaching, and I will say my passion for teaching arose from teaching for 3 years at the University of Detroit Jesuit High School. I love and am passionate about high school teaching. And if I'm even remotely effective as a college instructor, it's because I learned to love teaching with high school students. But one of the things I noticed a long time ago, and I've continued to notice with my students, is that by beginning with action, we invite engagement. We allow our identity to stick to a story. We share something of ourselves, what we're passionate about, what our vision of the world is or might be, and we have a better chance of that remaining with a person. We remember stories. We're storytelling creatures. I cannot resist sharing. So I'm reading right now. I have 32 juniors and seniors in an elective course called Contemplation and Action. And at the end of each class section, we read one chapter from The Little Prince. And for whatever reason, I will call it divine providence, the story of The Little Prince, which we read with Jim Skirl at St. Ignatius all those years ago, it continues to resonate with the students tremendously. And just about every class, whatever it is that we were talking about that day, it just seems that chapter picks up a thematic thread that sticks with them. And so it is sort of like kindergarten story hour. I'm like, at 3:10, I'm like, all right, everyone, time for The Little Prince. And they put their books down and they get comfy cozy. It's remarkable to see these kids who are engineers and chemists and such, putting their heads down and eagerly receiving a story. So I recommend the power of the story for all of us. The topic of today's talk is Missionaries of the Imagination. I took this starting really last year as a theme of my own. I was inspired to be a Jesuit because I knew and met Jesuits at St. Ignatius, and some of them were missionaries, and they talked often of missionaries. And as I moved through my Jesuit formation, I realized I was not as adept at language as I might like. I'm good at reading languages. I'm not good at speaking or enough to be proficient in a mission territory. But in time, I found that I could be a missionary of the imagination. If you think of the beginning of Mark's gospel, this is the time of fulfillment. The kingdom of God is at hand. Repent and believe in the gospel. The Gospel of Mark begins with Jesus on the way. He is proclaiming, it is active, it's not the most elegantly written of the Gospels, but it is chock full of Jesus's works, what he was doing with people, and with Jesus's words, how he was speaking and communicating something of the kingdom to them. In the Second Vatican Council, the Church, prompted by the Holy Spirit, must walk in the same path on which Christ walked, a path of poverty and obedience, of service and self-sacrifice to the death. The Council Fathers clearly taught sophomores. But this notion of being missionaries, of being sent out to proclaim the good news and to work on behalf of the kingdom, is something that each one of us is invested in every time we walk into our classrooms. Now, the problem with talking about the imagination is that very often we think imagination is something to be derided. Children are meant to be imaginative, but adults, we are wrapped up with matters of consequence. We talk about facts and figures, and we have to know the right answers to things. What is the imagination? The imagination is the creative and recreative power to perceive, to interpret, and interact with reality. We are called to form this power. We as teachers are formers of this power for our students through theological reflection. People who denigrate the imagination have not read Thomas Aquinas' Summa Theologia, question 84, Pars Prima, at question 84, Article 7, the conversion to the image. We do not know anything without sense perception. We know nothing without the image. It is senseless to make fun of the imagination. That does not mean we can't make fun of or be suspicious of fantasy. What is fantasy? TikTok. Fantasy flees the real. Fantasy is egoistic and untruthful, fearful, threatened, narcissistic, and pusillanimous. The motto, if you know the Jesuit saying of, is it gets inverted, it's ad maiorem mei gloriam, all for the greater glory of me. It is my curated image. It is the fantasy world that is fragile. If you've ever read the novelist and philosopher Iris Murdoch, marvelous with one-liners. The enemy of the moral life is the fat, relentless ego, enslaved by fantasy. We have a lot, and if you think of some of the fragility of our students' consciousnesses, their identities are often because they occupy these fantasy worlds that are very easy to collapse inward. By contrast, the imagination engages the world. It is truthful, liberated, and properly formed, liberating. The imagination explores creation's breadth and depth. It's the imagination that gives us a poet like Gerard Manley Hopkins to explore the inscape of reality. The imagination is hopeful and excited, eccentric, standing outside of the self, and magnanimous. The imagination is what makes us able to pray full-throatedly, ad maiorem Dei glorum, all for the greater glory of God. I think it is one of the great crimes of our education system that we corrupt so quickly and stultify the imaginations of kindergartners who are, I think, natively truthful, liberated, and in their play. I was watching my nieces and nephews at my parents' house last night. Their play is liberating. And so what does it mean to be a missionary of the imagination? Our mission is to deliver an education that is at once informative and transformative. Informative, to transmit content. There is something to know. Transformative, to mediate encounters, to interiorize and appropriate theology as a way of life. Engaging our students' imaginations forms how they perceive and interact with creation. So my presentation today for you today, again, I didn't want to read a paper. I am not arrogant enough to tell teachers what to do. I don't like being told what to do. I'm inviting you to think with me as I approach, this is how I approach teaching college freshmen, which is truly mission territory some days. I had a student, my first year of teaching in 2018 at Marquette, looked at, like at midpoint of the semester, raised her hand. She was lovely. I was like, yeah. She goes, wait, so Jesus was real. Well, he wasn't having tea with the Easter Bunny. Yeah, I mean, like he was a real person. The level of what is not known can never be underestimated. So for the through line of today's talk is a book that I co-authored with my colleague Connor Kelly, who Will You Become? An Ignatian Introduction to Catholic Theology. I call it an Ignatian Enchiridion for two reasons. The word Enchiridion means a handbook and dagger. And again, if you've taught sophomore boys or sophomores in general, maybe you need both. This is a book that emerged from having to teach during the pandemic, a class of 226 students. And because we couldn't do social distancing, Connor and I would do instructional videos every week. We figure it takes about 1 hour to make 1 minute of instructional video. And then we would write our lectures out in Microsoft Word format and did this every week for a semester. Then we did it again, refined the next semester. And our colleagues found our written notes to be very helpful and encouraged us to continue workshopping it. And so we've published it as it's a standalone book. And it's our way of practicing what we teach. There are two key questions that animate this book that sort of gets under the students' defenses right away. What do I really value? What is it that I value? And how do I live up to and live out my values? Father Howard Gray, of happy memory, a very influential here, John Carroll. You said, put the question of spirituality as, who is your God? How have you come to know your God? And what does God ask of you? Who is your God? What do I really value? How have you come to know your God? In what ways has this been revealed to me in my daily life? And what does your God ask of you? What's its purchase? What's the call that it makes on you? And what we have found in our teaching is that the students really do want to grapple with something and embrace something that makes an absolute purchase on their lives. The infinite God makes an infinite purchase. Anything less is idolatry. Now, you can't tell them that on the first day, but you help them to find it out as you go along. And so the way we did this book, so again, I'm a Jesuit priest. For those of you, I do not assume that people have great familiarity with the Society of Jesus or Ignatian spirituality. But Connor and I thought that one way we could help our students and be very mission-centric at a Jesuit university is by what we have taken to calling the Ignatian but. Now, the editor of the book made us change the framing of this because our whole shtick was like, I go to the gym and I start doing curls because I want to work out my biceps. I do flies to work my back and delts. And then I do squats to work on my butt. The Ignatian butt was to become aware, to understand, and take action. And we developed these spiritual muscles through spiritual exercises. Discernment as the prayerful method for discovering and accepting who God calls us to become. And so the way the book has forced us to reframe this is the Ignatian but as a pause, a stepping back to reevaluate. And in that reevaluation, we become aware of our context, our situation, and God's presence. I do always pick on sophomores. I know they tend to be the most reviled group, but they were my favorite group to teach. But even amidst the sophomore boy who's licking his desk for some reason unknown to even his therapist probably, like that God is even somehow present within this child. It is an amazing God we have. Becoming aware of our context, and then that leads us to try to understand God as laboring in this moment, how God is stirring our hearts and calling us in some way to imagine how the world could be, and finally taking action by putting this into practice. I've become aware in this moment, not a theory, but in the practical, the messiness of the hurly-burly daily life. I'm aware that God is at work here, and I use my theological and philosophical and social resources to understand more what God is up to. How is God at work in this student's life, in this classroom, in this institution, in this curriculum? And then, through prayer and discernment and discussion, I try to take action to respond to God's call to become who we are called to be. That every decision in my life leads me as a Christian to draw nearer to Jesus Christ and to work in a way that I become transparent and allow my life to witness to values far beyond me, the values of the kingdom. And in a sinful and broken world, those are fighting words. So what does that look like? The first 3 chapters of the book, this entire talk will basically trace the outline of the text. Chapters 1 to 3 introduce the theological narratives and frameworks that we find students will resonate with. How Catholics read and understand Scripture. This will not surprise you. The biblical illiteracy of students is staggering. How we detect God's presence in our life stories. You'll see that in a moment. Identifying our goal or telos. We're going to play a game in a few minutes. We do a deathbed meditation. So every chapter at the end has a spiritual exercise included. So it's an interactive book to the extent that students will do the exercises. And then we confront the mystery of evil vis-a-vis the Lion King. Who needs Hostel? Who needs Saw? If you want to talk about evil, you got The Lion King. That is mass carnage, and we let children watch it. Astonishing. The meditation on how we are, and that leads us to a meditation on how we are called to serve a suffering world. So just briefly, the first question that God asks in Scripture, at least as you read, if you start on page 1 in Genesis, God's first question is, where are you? It is after Eve and Adam have eaten of the tree, and now they are hiding because long before the Learning Channel made it a cable series, Adam and Eve are naked and afraid. And so what we ask our students to do, and we give them the tools to do it from the very beginning of the semester, and it's something we practice throughout the semester, is the spiritual exercise of the examen to help them become aware of where God is actively at work in their lives. I'll show you what that looks like in a moment. The examen itself is a meditative prayer practice that lets us step back and notice God's presence in our lives. Now, those who teach in Jesuit schools, many schools have already instituted this, where they every day they set aside time to do over the PA system and examine. But I have found this to be, we can't do that on the university setting, but I have found that a 3 or 4 minute step back in an hour and 15-minute class works very well to give students a moment to step away from what they've been thinking and engaging with, to reflect on how it is affecting them, and then before we move on into the next unit of conversation. So what we do, so you could do this, and I have Saturday and Sunday on there, but I'm neurotic. If I'm going to make a calendar for a week, I do the whole week. As an in-class exercise, again, if to the extent that this is helpful, to the extent that this becomes a dagger in your arsenal, I commend it to you. You invite the students to center themselves, to recall that they are in God's presence. Now, for those of you, again, not in a Jesuit school, imagine restive juniors on a Wednesday afternoon of a full 5-day week. Clearly, it's not a Jesuit high school, because Jesuit high schools don't go to school for 5 days in a row, or only seldom. But so it's Wednesday, they're restive, they're cranky. Get them to pause. All right, we're going to do an examen. All right, put your books down. Center yourself, recall that you're in God's presence. Begin with an attitude of gratitude. Allow them to name something for which they are grateful. Ask them to canvass the last 24 hours of their lives. Maybe the last hour and 15 minutes of class, or however, 50 minutes of class. People have very differing schedules. Where have they noticed places of distraction, feeling frayed or broken? Give them a moment. And if you have like a little journal for them, if you've encouraged this as a practice, they can write that down. Look at places of flourishing. Where have you felt alive? Was there something today that we talked about in class that really resonated with you and excited you? And then, to conclude, use your imagination to anticipate a decision or an attitude. I have an Algebra 2 test coming up. I'm terrified of it. How are you going to approach it? Could be that simple. Can you envision yourself making the right decision? And then you note this intention. And what can happen we have three sections, each of 30, of our introduction to theology classes, trying this as a daily practice for the students. And we're now at the semester, so we'll meet after fall break to discuss it. But the anecdotal evidence is that the students are really noticing patterns within their own lives, the affective movements of what's affecting them, how they think about their majors. For college students, this is the time of year when they've had 2 or 3 biology, chemistry, accounting, calculus tests, and they realize that their plans for medical school may not be in the cards, and that they need to reevaluate and rethink who they're being called to become. So again, I offer this as an in-class spiritual exercise. It's something you can do with them. You can turn this to course content. You can turn this to their own spiritual lives. It's very flexible. It's very incorporable, and it can take 5 minutes. You can use a timer for it. It's all good. The exam, and again, this it's fine. Examine uncovers patterns and movements within our hearts. God speaks to us through our desires and calls us to be companions through the world. From the moment they enter our classrooms, we can introduce them to God as a vital, vitalizing, liberating power who calls each of us uniquely. You can never underestimate the baggage kids come into our classrooms with. But to see God as vital and vitalizing is liberating, empowering, challenging. And the task is a reflective habitus, a reflective, settled disposition wherein they take stock of their desires and consider how these desires might be lived out concretely. Again, theology is a way of life. So this is our Theo nerd moment. We're gonna play a game in just a second. So we're gonna talk about teleology. Who doesn't love teleology? I mean, that's what gets me up in the morning. Actually, it does get me up in the morning because I do have a sense of purpose. What is teleology? The word, it comes from the Greek telos, or end. It's the study of what something is for, its purpose or its goal. And it presumes we can know something's nature. What is it? Its proper end. What does it do? What's it for? And norms for judging good or bad. So I'm gonna give you this is the Ryan Dunn's and Caridian as a teacher. The things I need in life right now, apart from my laptop and a credit card, I need my iMovie. And if you have YouTube, you can learn to do anything with iMovie from YouTube. I need Audacity. That's a free recording software. And Audacity, and 4K video downloader. And you'll see why in a moment. 4K video downloader allows you to pull videos off of YouTube without ads. So when you want to show a clip in class, you don't get commercials. I learned this the hard way. I was trying to show a clip. I clicked it, and it was for women's underwear. I'm like, I have no idea. It was extremely awkward. It's some weird algorithm. That's not. Anyway, we're going to play a game in a moment, but I'm going to show you how I introduce this. So imagine big 226 kid auditorium, and this is our video introduction to the game we play.
Hello, undergraduates. I want to play a game. Do you ever wonder about the thin line between fear and excitement? Today, I invite you to cross that line and enter a world where terror and chance intertwine. Prepare yourself for heads or talos. Beware, this is no ordinary game. Your choices have consequences. The coin I flip holds your destiny. When this game reaches its talos, only one of you will be left standing. Go ahead, make your choice. Heads or talos. Remember, there are no winners here, only survivors.
So that's the jigsaw doll, and you'll understand even more of why I use the jigsaw doll shortly. So can I get you all to stand up? This is a game I adapted from being at a wedding. And I don't know why we played this game. So this is heads, or you put your hands on your end, or talos. So the game was heads or tails. So instead of your tail, you get a talos. I'm going to flip the coin. Again, always in my repertoire, my 1/4 that I keep in my book bag. If it's heads and your hands are on your head, you get to stay standing. If your hands are on your head and I called talos, you have to sit down. And it becomes oddly competitive because the kids think that they have some magical way of manipulating the odds. And so we'll play until we get to the ends. Ready? So make your choice. Heads, hands on your head, or hands on your talos. Heads. All right, make your choice. Heads or talos? Heads. Heads or talos? Heads. Play the lottery tonight. Heads or talos? Heads. There really is a tails on this side, I can promise you. Okay, heads or talos? Talos. Ooh, clash of titans here. Heads or talos? Heads.
Wow.
All right. I will give you a spiritual bouquet. That's your door prize. So why do we do this? Okay, so pedagogically, I've introduced a word. We have said it over and over again. I've given them a physical association with the word telos, and now I can start to do something remarkable with them, which is this. Which of these achieves the telos of a computer? Which of these is a good computer? Perfectly reasonable question to ask. I feel like upper right-hand corner every time I sit down to write something. That's usually how the writing ends. But for all intents and purposes, I think we would agree the good computer is the one on the left. Which of these achieves the telos of the annual Christmas tree? When we know what something is, we can begin to judge it good or bad if it fulfills its, or fails to fulfill, its nature or purpose. Which of these achieves the telos of predators or carnivores? I always get one student who gets upset about this. You're making fun of vegans. I'm like, I'm not. This would not be, this lion would not live for very long if it were a vegan lion. And then which is the telos of the washing machine? I think if any of you in the Clevelanders have been to Il Rione, that's my brother-in-law's restaurant. Yeah, it's great pizza. I think this is how Brian operates with the babies. Like he would put a child in the washer. Good at making a pie, not so much with the. Now, how does this cash out? All of us have encountered, I would wager, the question, well, who am I to judge? I mean, if that's the best life you want to live, if that's that you have to live your truth, we can live with a version of teenage moral relativism that can be deeply problematic. And so I try to bring up the question, can then we speak of a human end or purpose? What does it mean to be a human? All of a sudden, they've realized we make sorts of evaluations all the time about phones and cars, about food, processed, unprocessed, whatever it's going to be. All of the things in the world around us, we can talk about being good or bad. Well, what can we do with human ends or purposes and get into a conversation about that? Now, it can take you down a host of rabbit holes, which we don't need to go down today. But at the very least, it opens up a way of framing, talking about purpose. A yes to this is kryptonite to callow relativism. I don't know if you struggle with that. That's the one we face in class all the time. And the paradox, and it's a paradox that theology helps us to understand and appreciate, is that we become most ourselves, we reach our telos by giving ourselves away. And as we are looking at the image of Jesus Christ and tracing him through the Gospels and tracing the lives of saints and martyrs and Christian witnesses through history, we start to see these self-donating examples who show us what it means to be truly and fully human. And this, when you can invite students to reflect on who are the fully human people in your lives and what makes them fully human? How do they reveal what it means to be a good person? They're loving, generous, they spend time. These are all ways of framing and giving a language to what we have experienced as the Christian faithful in Jesus Christ. Now, the frustration, and I don't know, I'm going to assume I've been out of the high school classroom for a little while, but the frustration is that students presume that theology is nothing but Bible study. That's a big thing for college freshmen. And counter it, I wanted to defy our expectations by offering a way of approaching biblical narratives, a new or unorthodox way of approaching biblical narratives. And admittedly, using horror movie plots is unconventional, but the way even no gore films work can help students to think about the Old and New Testaments differently. So whereas chapters 1 through 3 focus on engaging students' imaginations to become aware of God's activity in our lives, chapters 4 through 7 invite them to understand the Christocentric depths of creation. I just, as a shout out, John Arthur's grandmother makes an appearance in chapter 1, my Aunt Sissy. Oh yeah, yeah. It's lots of relations. It's Cleveland. So this is, if you've never read Mary Midgley, she's great on the YouTube. She's now deceased, but she died at the age of, I think, 99. The line here is taken from the film critic Robin Wood. Normality is threatened by the monster. And what appeals to me about the genre of horror is it aims to do what it says. It threatens to overturn the status quo. There are two types of horror movies in general. The first one I want to talk about is the overreacher plot. You prepare an experiment or ritual, you conduct the experiment or ritual, you unleash some form of evil, and then you have to confront it. And if you start to think about, if you're familiar with the 1980s movie like Hellraiser, that's a very good example. Frankenstein is a good example of the overreacher. So again, this is where 4K video downloader comes in handy. So yeah, you can see like, oh, Candyman is another one. Anything with a Ouija board, I tell the students, you go messing with Ouija boards, do not come knocking at my door when you've opened the gates of hell and you need an exorcist, because I'm not going to help you. You are on your own. The theory of the overreacher plot is that there is some knowledge that is not worth having. So this is a very non-bloody but decent little film.
Bloody Mary. Bloody Mary. Bloody Mary.
226 students, it will always be one boy lets out a shriek. Shame, shame. But if you look at the dynamics of that plot line, if you look at the dynamics carefully, the ritual is a form of temptation. Look, don't you want that? Go ahead, reach out and take it. Don't you want to know? The experiment takes, eats, and shares. You find out you're naked and afraid. Evil is unleashed. Eden's normality, the way God intended the world to be, in pacific harmony, is disrupted. Things are not as they should be. The telos, what we are for, has been corrupted. This, I would not join anything other than to say, helping students to see the plot line of the overreacher plot and then giving them Genesis 3 changes the way they read it. They hold on to it in a different way. And then, because they think the 1980s are ancient history, so this unit, it was taught the first week of October. The students are now coming in like, I watched Candyman the other night. That's an old movie, right? But they realize that this is the same story. They're now seeing the biblical plot elsewhere, which is the point. Theology is a way of seeing, a way of perceiving. The confrontation that takes place, a form of, in Genesis 3, alienation, conflict. And students start to see that this horror story that they watch in a short clip isn't just a story, it's our story. That this story that they have heard time and time again, if they go to church, but it's a story that they are familiar with, isn't just a story, a myth. It's a story that narrates and structures our lives and experience. They find themselves in that story and can see why this makes sense, why we memorialize these narratives. So yeah, there's the other one. The other form of a horror film is powered by what are called complex discovery plots. And these can be tinkered with all over the place. There's onset, which is the disruption. Horror, incidentally, is the most conservative of all genres. Most conservative. Because the whole point is to maintain the status quo. The goal of the horror film, when it works, is that there's something that is disrupting what is the accepted status quo of a person, a city, a civilization, a community, and that has to be resisted. And so there's some form of disruption, something is amiss. There is the discovery that we have to recognize the signs of the bad actor that has malefic intent. There's a form of confirmation, accepting reality. I mean, it's at the confirmation stage, if you remember the movie Jaws, like that's the problem. They won't accept the truth. No, it couldn't be that. It can't be a great white. It's anything but. And then there's the confrontation. You have to face it. So again, I try not to show like overly scary things in class, but this is a great short film, award-winning, very quick. But you can see the the reason I chose, and I wrote a book called The Theology of Horror for this reason. Just anecdotally, but there's statistics to prove this, the most popular genre films among the students we teach between the ages of 14 and 24, tied with comedy, is horror. So you can rest assured that not all of them, certainly not all of them, those who don't like horror really don't like it, but you have wide swaths of students who don't, for whom this is their primary form of entertainment. And they have Shudder and Screambox subscriptions, because I do too, that give them chances to dig into these films. And my approach was I wanted to take an unorthodox approach to excavating very orthodox theological themes that are embedded within the popular imagination. And teaching, I had 80 kids in the Theology of Horror last spring, and it went very well. And they were surprised at how, when you looked at the right angle, you can pull out a lot of interesting theological themes. And the way I do this, and this is, so we do horror, the horror story of history, the horror story of sin, as a way of helping us to get into the narratives of the gospel. Because what is the onset? The onset as the incarnation. The birth of the word, the incarnation of the word of God into the horror story that sin has made of human history. The process of discovery, that Jesus's works and words begin to reveal another ethos, another way of being in the world, the way God envisions things to be, a way of reclaiming and restoring the telos for which we are intended. There's the point of confrontation at the cross. And then the resurrection and the gospel, the preaching of the gospel, the life and ministry of the church, of its missionaries, testifying to the truth of what it is. In a way, the way I would put it is the gospel is the inversion of the horror story. What attracts people to in horror movies, onset, discovery, confrontation, and confirmation, the photographic negative, which is the story of grace and God, and good triumphing over evil, is the story of the gospel. But it's the story of our horror story being exposed and disrupted. And that's why this is Herbert McCabe, whose little homilies are a great resource for students. They're very accessible. If you do not love, you will scarcely be alive. If you love effectively, they will kill you. The brutal realism of the crucifixion, but it is the narrative of the undoing of the horror story of sin. And it reveals to us a way out. And so I just throw this up here very quickly. This is Athanasius. Human, you have to get the patristics in there every now and again. So St. Athanasius, humans turn from their telos, its sin. God renews this image through Jesus Christ, who shows us what it looks like to be fully human, fully divine in an inhuman world. The incarnation, it shows monstrare, God's true image, and it works to heal the hellscape of sin. The students gave me the word hellscape. I was impressed by that. Now, where this can work, and again, I offer this as something you can try. This is the story taken from Mark 3 of the man with the withered hand. So the story of Christianity precedes the creed. Always worth remembering that. And what I find it helpful to do with students is to use their imaginations, and this is a very Ignatian practice, to dwell in the biblical texts, and by inviting students into sites of encounter. Just close your eyes for a moment. I'm going to do this from memory, not repeat the story. But Jesus is in the synagogue teaching, and there is a group of Pharisees and wise and learned teachers who are listening to him and vexed by his pretense to have authority. And Jesus, being a very good high school teacher, is aware of his surroundings, and he notices off in the shadows at the edge of the temple, a figure skulking and lurking in the shadows. He sees this man. Maybe he has seen him there many times before, always wanting to be on the edge or the margin, feeling that's the only place that he can be. And in front of his doubters and skeptics, he has the audacity to point to this man and call him forward. And so the man with the withered hand, grudgingly and haltingly, steps out of the shadows and moves towards the center of the synagogue, where he comes close to Jesus, who locks eyes on him and loves him and seems to know what everyone else secretly knows but doesn't want to say, that this man with the withered hand that he has hidden in the folds of his robes because it is a sign of shame is there to be healed. And so in front of the doubters and the skeptics, he tells the man, stretch out your hand. And the man in the inside hears, stretch out the sign of your shame, the thing that has kept you on the sidelines all this time, this thing that has made you feel unwanted and unlovable and out of communion with everyone else. This Jesus fellow wants me to stretch this out, to expose myself again, to be seen. And yet Jesus's words are so compelling, his voice so inviting, that the man overcomes all reservation and reaches out his hand, and he is healed. And at this point, you can invite your students to consider, what is their withered hand? What is the secret shame or fear that holds them back, that keeps them on the sidelines, that makes them feel unknowable, unwantable, unlovable? And how might they be called to extend this out and receive healing from the one who wants to make them whole? Jesus is not trying to make them different. He is trying to make them whole so that they may achieve their telos, their end or purpose. In this encounter, Christ restores the lost image. And all of a sudden, as teachers, we can start to address the question of call-out culture, with which our students are very familiar, being called out, shamed, named, canceled, and transform that culture into a call-in culture. How do we, as friends and companions of Jesus, call students and others in to conversation? It doesn't mean ignoring differences or not having hard conversations or raising real concerns. But it is to say that if we're going to be in community with one another, we have to find a principle of communion. And as theology teachers, we can do that with Jesus, who calls us all in. Moving forward, so John, this is not your granny, this is my granny. My granny, when we were kids, used to say, and maybe, I think this is like a very cultural Catholic thing, there but for the grace of God go I. So Granny we'd be driving down the street, and Granny would say, we'd see a car accident. She's like, oh, there but for the grace of God. And as I've gotten older, I realized that that's not quite exactly true. Granny thought that grace, that God's grace, kept us out of the muck and mire of life. But with Jesus, a new pattern is being revealed. Love does not excuse one from acting. And I will wager that the Pope's new apostolic letter would reaffirm this. I have to read it on the way home tonight. On the contrary, it's there because of God's grace I go. God's grace leads into the darkness to struggle in solidarity with others against sin, as people who have been called in and encountered the liberating power of Jesus Christ, to then go out in solidarity with one another to be agents of liberation, to be agents of the good news. That's theologic. That's the logos, the word that animate of God. It's not just words about God. Most of the time, most of the classes I took in college they call theologology. people talking about other people talking about God. And it's vital and valid. You have to know what other people say. But at some point, we have to know what we say to speak the truth that has set us free. Christian realism, faith confronts the horrors of history. The cross is the consequence of being fully human in an inhuman world. Sin says might makes right. The cross says God's love is stronger than death. The invitation is to become mystics of open eyes, Johann Baptist Metz, to see and respond to the needs of others, no matter how inconvenient. And I think of the remarkable service work done by our high school students in so many ways, the corporal and spiritual works of mercy that the Universe Bulletin or the diocese will promote. I keep up a little bit with Cleveland News. I'm always struck with the service that our high school students are capable of providing to the world. I'm most familiar with St. Ignatius as an alum, but I'm just always so gratified by seeing the work that we can do. Our students, through their, especially the service programs, being able to become mystics of open eyes. How does this play out? So I offer this as just I'm going to do a quick resource thing for you. So American Horror Story is a popular television show. The quality has gone down in recent years, but I watch it still. Our students will ask the question, this happened so long ago, so what? And the story that I like to tell is, in May 1918, a white plantation owner named Hampton Smith was killed by a black worker. There was a lynch mob launched to search for the shooter and those involved in the conspiracy. Within just days, 12 people were lynched, and one was a man named Hayes Turner, who had worked for Smith. Mary Turner was his wife, very pregnant at the time, and she had the audacity to call out the lynch mob. She refused to be silent. Ignatian realism, one way of looking at this, for the book we use this, is to look at sin-scarred history. Mary spoke the word of truth. And the consequence that she faced for not backing down in front of a lynch mob was death. And the dark grace of this experience is that Mary is not forgotten. Violence fails to silence her. Now, I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to push this forward just a little bit. There is a piece of jazz. This is I mean, again, I would not do this with my freshman high school students. I would do this with upperclassmen. But this is a brutal lynching. This is a brutal, brutal story. So you have to be treated with finesse. The college students get it, though. They string her up. They abuse the corpse. They kill the baby. It's terrible. But the reason I teach it is it's not an anti-American thing. It's because as Christians, we have to be able to have the courage to peer into the darkness of history. And there is a jazz piece, if we had more time, and we play this for the students as part of an examen, called Mary Turner, an American Tradition, provocative, admittedly, but the jazz does the talking. And so if you have students who, words don't always hit them, the music just may just. So I'm going to pass forward through that. When we think of imagination, faith is a way of perceiving creation's depths being revealed. But faith is a gift. It's a gift that enlivens and enkindles the imagination. Again, you can take, I'm just going to bump through because there's the ones I want to get to, and then we'll be done. Faith is sharing in the understanding of another, and it calls us to a new way of life. God overcomes death, ratifies who Jesus is, and ratifies Jesus' life and ministry. And then Aslan, this always works very well with them. I'll skip over, but that's, again, 4K video downloader, you pull that off, it goes over well. It occupies 3 minutes of class time, not bad. Faith preserves a dangerous memory, the memory of an event that disrupts sin's status quo, life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. It's a sign of hope that God sides with the oppressed. Dorothy Kazel, Thea Bowman, Maximilian Kolbe, who has a movie out apparently. He's not starring in it, but there's a but there's a movie about him. But this idea of that Christianity is that what we're teaching is not one thing among others, but that the reason we offer this theological education is to draw them into a story that is in so many ways so often too good to be true. And this is the one this story, I take it from Fleming Rutledge. But Birmingham Easter Sunday, 1964, Martin Luther King Jr. is in jail. And Wyatt Walker and Andrew Young organize a march on Easter Sunday to be with their pastor that morning. So they gather at New Pilgrim Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama. Note the name, the New Pilgrim Baptist Church. They gather together, and you can imagine 5,000 ultimately in their Sunday best, who have come to Sunday services. They gather on the outside of the church, and they begin the relatively short 1 mile or so walk to the jail. And again, we don't dress always in our Sunday best, but imagine 5,000 men, women, and children in their Sunday finest on an Easter Sunday morning on the hot, dusty Birmingham, Alabama. And as they turn the corner down the street, they see a row of red fire trucks. The hoses are charged, there are dogs at the ready, and the notorious Bull Connor, the chief of police, is standing there with his bullhorn and commands the group as they walk toward him, turn this group around, disperse, go back to where you came from. And there is confusion because we know what the dogs can do, and we know that you can be arrested, and I've never been hit with the full force of a fire hose, but I'm going to imagine it is not pleasant. And so 5,000 men, women, and children in their Sunday best are now faced with a tremendous question. What do we do? Do we go forward? Do we go backward? And at that moment, the leaders tell the people, get down on your knees and pray. Now, your students will appreciate this because today we would have our phones out and I'm putting this on Snap. Get down on your knees and pray. And so 5,000 men, women, and children in their Sunday best kneel down in the hot, dusty streets of Birmingham, Alabama, and begin to pray. Until one elderly leader of the movement, Charles Billups, leaps up and cries out, "The Lord is with this movement. We are going forward." And in a moment, men, women, and children get up off their knees and they start walking toward Bull Connor. Now, he loses his head over this, screaming, yelling. But the dogs didn't bark. The firemen did not unleash the hoses and, in fact, drop them. And these people who had just come from Sunday services celebrating the resurrection of Jesus Christ begin to sing, "I want Jesus to walk with me," as they move past the shiny red fire trucks on their way to the jail. And one elderly black woman was heard to remark, "The good Lord done parted the Red Sea one more time." Great God Almighty, done parted the Lord's sea one more time. Again, this is not a story. The story of the Exodus, the story of the resurrection isn't way back when. It is here and now. And there is not one of our students who does not need, there's not one of us who does not need to remember that story, that this is who we are, a people of the Exodus, a people of the resurrection, a people sent out on mission to be avatars and proclaimers and sacraments of the good news. And the book concludes in its last chapters with the skill, trying to inculcate the language and skill of discernment. This is a Howard Gray line: "A spirituality without consequences is an inconsequential spirituality." If your God does not ask you to do something, it's not really God. It's not the living God who makes a purchase on our lives because relationships ask us to do something. You can read the book and you'll get all sorts of wonderful tidbits on consolation versus desolation. Two directions Are you being moved toward your telos or toward God? Or are you being pulled away like a cashmere sweater in a bramble bush? What the psychologist Ken Gergen calls multifrenia, pulled in 10,000 directions. Are you being recollected, the work of the Spirit, or are you being torn apart? I give a whole schema of this. This is just for information purposes. Comparing tactics, we take them into the Ministry of Magic. You get the gist. How does Harry Potter in his memory? Where in Harry Potter's memory, Voldemort enkindles notions of doubt, division, being alienated from his friends, but then it's his memory of his friends, of being loved, of loving others, of being in communion is what saves him. And so I just leave this because I don't want to, I would be long-winded on an already long-winded morning. We stand daily on the frontiers of mission territory. Through images, narratives, and music, we can invite students to undertake the liberating practice of a theological life. Our calling is not to invite them to see a different world. It is to see the world differently. See the world differently. As charged with God's grandeur. What we do touches every aspect of life. And we have the grace and burden of serving the triune mystery. By empowering students to search for and encounter God in all things, we will be handing on tradition to hand to the next generation. Good news that has shaped us and they will become. I offer this again, everything, because the content is there. It's trying to find the imaginative hooks, whatever it takes. Going in their doors, to bring them out, to make accessible, incredible, and livable the good news that we share together. The good news that has moved all of us and inspired us to be teachers, and it's good news that our students not only need to hear, but they deserve to hear. To give them a word of hope. Otherwise hopeless times. Find a way forward. In a way that is empowering, incredible, and joy-filled and life-giving. So with that, I think we have 5 minutes. If you have anything you'd like to ask, or amen. Okay, so Mr. Prokop will appreciate. I think I watched The Song of Bernadette and The Exorcist on the same day. At the end of so The Exorcist will always be my favorite. I love though The Black Phone. It's not bloody. I don't like gore. I don't like things like sticking into eyes and teeth are not for me. I like psychological horror, but The Black Phone is really good. And if you watch it, I think it's streaming on Amazon. Say to yourself, God writes straight with crooked lines. Watch the movie, then repeat the line at the end, and you have a whole new theology of providence. It's really interesting. I think that's a good one.
You talk about the difference between imagination and fantasy. I guess, how do you encourage kids with your imagination and think, well, that's just for children?
Totally. That's why the contrast with fantasy is so important. And you can give them, especially the role of the influencer is so pronounced right now. And those are such Aristotle's lives that they see these curated images and they only see snippets, but that is a fantasy that they think is reality. So the more we can help people see, no one lives like that. It gives them license to use their imaginations. I have a great kid, early admit to med school, but he said that this is the first, he's a senior in my class, so we talk a lot about imagination, which is part of the reason I'm reading The Little Prince to them. But for him, it's a really big deal that he be allowed to explore with his imagination because he's been discouraged from that. Imagination is a dirty word I hate to say it, in business school sometimes. Oh, that's too imaginative. Well, what else could it be? If it's a good idea, it springs forth from the imagination. Fantasy it's like the pornography of the mind. I mean, it's helping no one. I mean, it's not real. It's candy floss. So imagination gives them something with a bit of meat.
In just be fairness, I'm assuming I'm not the only Tolkien fan here. So let me ask this. When it comes to fantasy, right, I could totally go ahead and put on some ear elves, put some, hair on my feet here and pretend to live in Hobbleton as much as I would love to, fly me to New Zealand and having a great time. What is the difference then of my fantasy of wanting to live that out or wanting to have that and their fantasy that they're living in right now, right? Because it seems like we each have our own versions of fantasy that is healthy, that is expressed in an imaginative way. Yeah.
I think that's just it. It's expressed in an imaginative way, but I think it would be very problematic if you thought you could live your entire life as a hobbit. Maybe, I mean, you could find the conditions where it could be lived out. Yeah, yeah. I think that's really it. I mean, can you live this as fully as a way of life? That's always a question.
I appreciate wanting to meet students where they're at and understanding that a lot of students are into horror films, but how do you kind of reconcile either students who aren't or just even yourself kind of going into that darkness? I've always been about what are you feeding your soul, and if you're feeding your soul horror movies that, under my life I didn't actually watch the video, not because I don't want to be scared, but because I'm I don't want that in my soul, I don't want that in my image. So how do you kind of reconcile meeting them where they're at to bring them to a better location, right? So understanding Christ, understanding that sin is real, sin really is terrifying. But I guess I don't know how to reconcile that.
So I would say first it's because I think of my Christian faith that I can see it as we recognize sin. And horror is one example, but I imagine you could find any number of them. I find horror helpful. I mean, I don't find, these are jump scare movies to illustrate the movements of horror. I could find very easily more provocative, but real world examples. That often opens up the problem of parent phone calls, other parent phone calls. I mean, the minority of phone calls I've gotten because of horror versus if I were talking about something political, especially early on with younger students, that tends to be, that's why I try to find anything pop culture media that would resonate in some way with them. But I completely appreciate not everyone is that way.
Trying to be oh, see my priests watching horror films. It's okay to go watch horror films.
Yeah.
Do you find that happens?
No, I make them, if I'm good at anything, I'd like to think, I try to make them judicious watchers of films. So the Hostel, Saw, the torture porn things, I'm like, don't waste your money, don't waste your time. I try to find intellectual, Rosemary's Baby, The Exorcist, Night of the Living Dead, the original. Some of them are just very interesting from a cultural historical artifact point of view. But I also I try not to let them think that it's real. That's part of it. This is fantasy. Let's diagnose how the fantasy works. Yeah.
I've come back to teaching after being away for just a handful of years, 3-4 years, and I've found that students are at a different level than they were even just a few years ago. And one of those areas I've noticed is what I would call a difficulty with interiority, and I would attribute that to a lack of reading literature or stories or examples. One of the things I'm just wondering what you think would be a good way. Are films a way to kind of give them some sense of interiority? Because my own thought would be, unless you have a narrator going over and over, or people sort of offering a soliloquy in the middle of the film, there still isn't that level of interiority. And then students tend to not even watch full films anymore. They certainly don't read full novels very much anymore. What would you say is a good practice towards giving them that experience of imagination of others to help coordinate their own sense of interiority?
Yeah, I mean, this is the swipe up, the scroll up and down, swipe left, swipe right. They don't have to sit and engage anything for more than 7.5 seconds. So that is the challenge. We've been lucky with short stories. Have any of you read The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas? That tends to go over very well with them. It's very short, very, very short. Ursula Le Guin, and I find that to work. The examine, I think asking students, you could do, if you're pairing, say, a film and a practice of the examine, you could have them watch and then give either guiding questions or do the examine. What in the film struck you? What moved your heart? What made you feel something? So you could use the examine as a structuring apparatus to reading or viewing. I know at Marquette University, we have a whole group of kids who are watching The Chosen together. That seems to be very popular. I've watched episodes. Every time I watch something there, though, I cry. I'm not really a crier either, which is always, but I like I find Jesus very compelling in that film. I find something very helpful and consoling about him that animates my own imagination. So I think you can't just give them the book. You can't give them the book and expect to read it. So it's chunking, it's asking the probing questions and giving them the space. The practice of the examine is a practice of, it's a habitus of taking stock of what's going on interiorly and then hopefully being able to talk about it. Okay.
So to your point, Flannery O'Connor was profiled on PBS and there was animated shorts of her stories in it. But then, so like in terms of, there's a line in that that says that she found a way of tricking the devil into preaching the gospel. And if you pair that, like to your point, there's a collection of Flannery O'Connor's prayer journal that is in sight. And so if you take this person who's writing these horrifying stories that have this surprising twist, and then you pair that with her prayer journal, and you get to see inside her prayer life. Worth doing.
Yeah, Flannery O'Connor, it's funny, I love like A Good Man is Hard to Find or Revelation. I think that's my favorite is Revelation. There's a bit of Ruby Turpin in all of us, but those stories are really hard. Like the students, college students struggle. They're very literal. Like they lack the imagination. So that's why anything I can do to finesse the imagination, the way that they see the world, the way that we structure narratives, the way music and art and literature can inform them. I think we have a fighting chance for the action of the gospel to create the possibility for the seed of the gospel to be planted.
Thank you.